Hey everyone, I'm Wilton Historical Society Associate Curator Nick Foster, here to give you a quick update about the digital projects and videos that the Society has been producing for the past several weeks. Now, regular viewers know that we've been working on a schedule of 2 videos a week. One is our What's It Wednesday on Wednesdays, which is a historical mystery object guessing game, and then our deep dive History is Here videos on Fridays. Now, we'll be shifting from 2 videos a week to 1 video a week. And I'll be alternating between those 2 styles of videos, between What's It Wednesday and History is Here. And those both will be coming out on Wednesday mornings. Now, the reason we are doing that is the Society is shifting some of its priority towards a new digital project on the history of women's suffrage to celebrate the centennial of women's suffrage in 2020. So in the short term, you'll get fewer videos, but that's with the promise of a great new women's suffrage digital project that'll be launching later in the summer. Now, today's video was actually a video that was shot several years ago of the Society's former board president, Walter Smith. Now, Walter passed away in 2015, and the video was shot shortly before that. And in that, Walter is going to give you a tour of our 1860s Abbot Barn. And those of you who don't know, Walt was instrumental and was a vital piece in getting the Society to preserve the 19 historic structures that we have throughout Wilton. Walt was an expert builder, an expert building preservationist, and a lover of antique tools, and the bulk of which Walt donated to the Society, and you can see just a small portion of it on the walls behind me. So Walter will be giving you a tour of our 1860s Abbot Barn and his tool collection in this upcoming video. It's a highly educational and highly entertaining piece, and enjoy, and I'll be back next week with a new video.
I'm Walter Smith. I've been in Wilton since 1946 permanently. Family have been here many more years before that. And I have done extensive work for the Wilton Historical Society. We are now in one of our buildings. It's the Abbot Barn. It's one of 5 buildings that make up the complex of the Wilton Historical Society Museum. Adjacent to the barn is a blacksmith shop. Both of them were owned by George Abbott. The barn is about 1860. The blacksmith shop was about 1900. George Abbott happened to be one of my uncles. He also was a blacksmith. It is stood originally up on Hurlbut Street, just south of the Hurlbut Street School. In about 1990, we had the opportunity to save it from the Wreckers Ball and dismantled both buildings and moved them to this present site on new foundations, keeping in mind that the exterior was to look as close to the original as we could make it. And I hope we have achieved that. To make the barn more useful and represent the lifestyle in Wilton, and particularly this area, I have collected tools for the last 50 years, and I have now assembled and displayed here in this barn about 600 tools that represent the different trades and crafts and tasks that were necessary to exist in Wilton and early farms of the 18th and 19th century. They're grouped into panels that show the different trades, like ice making, or ice harvesting rather, wood sawing, and all of the trades that basket making. And we'll get into it a little later, how we accomplish this. And as you go through the 2 lofts that they are housed in, I think it will tell a story of all the crafts that were needed to exist in places like Wilton in the 18th and 19th century. One of the tools that or devices such as that I'm sitting on is called a shaving horse. It's used by many different trades, from basket making, wheelwrights, coopering, making barrels, making handles, that was it. But it's really a tool you would really find, or a device that you'd find on the farm. And one of the real functions of it is to make wooden pegs that that hold a barn together, such as this Abbott barn. And one of the things that you used to make pegs was this draw knife. A draw knife was a great fun tool to use to make pegs or any shape that you wanted in. But you can see it by turning it and working the corners off, you start to get your round peg. Not only did the barn builders use this tool, this device, but also, as I say, many other trades. One of the things we tried to do was to identify different makers as well as use. And one of the big tool makers in the area that were manufactured was G.W. Bradley in Weston, Connecticut. This happens to be another draw knife that would be used for making masts on a ship, so that you got a broader broader handle so that your hands wouldn't hit the wood. Bradley made an extensive line of edge tools. Here's one of his design in a broad axe for hewing timber, was made in Weston, Connecticut. And Bradley was in business from about 1835 to about the turn of the century, 1900, and then it burned down was on Lyons Plains Road in Weston. The dam is still there. You had to have a good axe for first clearing land, and then as the axes started to develop, they were used, of course the trade axe was traded with the Indians. This is a very early shingle hatchet, and there are many other kinds of axes, like the broad axe. In that panel there's adze that do timber cutting. This is called an adze. This was used for finishing lumber, finishing timber. It was swung like a hoe and has a cutting edge. It was used extensively in shipyards for making wooden ships. This is a cooper's hand adze. It was used to shape the inside of the barrel staves. The cooper was an important person in the community because he made the containers that was used for all transportation of a dry cooper and a wet cooper. The wet cooper made the barrels for the liquid, the molasses, the ciders, all of the things that had to be tight. Iced harvesting was a big industry from about 1830 to the coming of refrigeration of 1900. And one of the companies in the area, Branchville Ice Tools, made tongs like this. They made a pike pole for moving the ice through the canal of the pond and to the ice house. we have, in our display, we have a picture of Dick Umstead getting ice in 1923 off of the Hemmelskemp Pond and pulling it in with a horse. And so we know it was a industry that went on into the 30s. And as I say, with the coming of refrigeration and the need for ice because of the urban development, people needed refrigeration. And so the early refrigerator was an ice box. It was called a refrigerator, but was stocked with ice from the local ponds. One of the other real industries in Wilton was sawmills. Hickok Sawmill was located on the Comstock Brook behind the Congregational Church. It was established in about 1730. Shortly after that, they built a grist mill on the opposite bank. The sawmill was was what is known as a framed up and down saw. So the saw basically went vertically. And if you look at a board that came out of the sawmill, you can tell the vertical saw marks that are absolutely perpendicular to the board and not always quite evenly spaced, but parallel. Bradley Hull of the forge made hubs, and wagon wheels were made up there for ox cart, and he operated a forge about 1852. So it was very important to have the wheel, and we have a good display of wheel making. One of the things that that was important was boring a hole for either building barns and the earliest of was a wooden brace with either a screw bit, but all made of wood with what they call a double crank. The first of the bits were what is known as a T-handled auger, and they drilled the bigger holes, and they're much slower in bitting. This is known as a nose auger bit. This is a forerunner to all of the twist augers. So this would be the first of bits that were used to drill holes, and it only drilled on that very cutting edge at the very bottom. And that's known as a nose auger cylinder bit. One of the operations that was so important was your gathering of crops, and hay was one of the big crop that was used for most animals for feed and bedding and many other uses. And when you gathered hay and put it into a mound, one of the difficulties was to get it out later. So they developed through the years what is known as a hay saw. This hay saw was a Connecticut pattern, and it's used like a saw and plunged into the stack to cut out a chunk of hay for feeding your animals. Because it was very difficult to take a pitchfork and get the hay out. One of the important operations was saddle making, harness making, and horse collar making. You realize that without a harness, you couldn't hook your animal to the load. Likewise, without a yoke, ox yoke, your oxen could not work without a yoke to something to hook the load to. This is a harness maker's vise, and it's caught up this way, and you stitch your harness together. Also, there was another little tricky end to a harness that had a round end, and this went through another little hole, and it was shaped into, it's called a rain rounder, and it's sewed together in the back. You can, so it goes from a flat harness to a round rein hooked onto the horse's nose. Hat making. Hat makers was a big industry in this area, and this is a hat mold. The felt was shaped over this with the rim, and the felt was shaped over, and this is a tool that was used to cut the rim. It's called a rim cutter, and it followed the shape of the hat and cut the rim. There were many hat makers that were here in Wilton. So that early hat makers, this is more of a Norwalk. Danbury was the center of hat making with thousands of people working in the industry in the 20th century. Next panel we have up there is shoemaking, and we are fortunate to have tools from one of our Wilton shoemakers, George Davenport. We have his workbench, we have some of his wooden lasts that he made individual shoes, and this is a typical shoemaker's hammer. Now the way the wooden last was designed for the individual foot, and he would have hundreds of these. Maybe George didn't, but others did, because you wrapped the leather around, nailed it in here temporarily, and then pulled it out of the leather, and then sewed the sole on the bottom. The whole area was really at one time big in making shoes, and the statistics in 1850 in Wilton showed there was 155 shoemakers on the census in 1850. My purpose in collecting tools is first to look back and see where we came from, not to live in the past, but we have to get back to learn how to work with our hands and how important it is. A tool is an extension of your hand and to do a task. And today we use a computer, which is fine for the modern generation, but it doesn't produce anything much more than paper and information. The old tools have a great romance to me because I was brought up in the building business. My father was there in 1922, and we had old craftsmen that made windows and did handwork, and I got a great appreciation of building and how things went together. I myself was a builder for 60-some years, so it's helped me through the years to understand how to put things together. And I find that first things come first, so you need a shovel to dig a hole to put it, and then you need a hammer and a saw to put the boards, and a shovel to mix cement. So you realize that nothing can be done physically without the knowledge of how to use tools. Well, as you can see, the tools have represented the different trades and crafts that were performed in the Wilton area. I think that it gives an overview of how you had to have these tools and a barn like this to contain your crops and store your grains, your equipment, your wagon. The barn became as necessary as a house, really, as your survival in the 18th and 19th century, because you depended so much on the animal, the horse, the oxen, and they had to be properly housed. And this was the kind of barn, typical hay barn that was in Wilton and Fairfield County and in general in this area. So I hope we have shown the different trades we have in our different exhibits. We have 32 different examples of handcrafted as well as manufactured tools.